Hey ladies and gentlemen, Stephen here from Redolessence and welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. And in today's episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at a fragrance by the company Aramis, and this is called Aramis Devin. So make sure to stay tuned. Now, before I begin the video, I do want to mention that if you like this type of content, if you like fragrance reviews here on YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you could support this channel by clicking on that red button in the corner. So whenever I do review future releases or even existing releases, but I choose to cover them for the first time on my channel, this content will get delivered straight to your feed. You never need to worry about missing any of my future uploads. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a fragrance that came out in 1977. So this fragrance has been around for a very long time now. The perfumer is Bernard Chant. He is a perfumer for IFF. He has done Cabochard by Grès. He has done many other fragrances for Aramis. He has just done tons and tons of fragrances. And so he has a pretty impressive resume, but we can see that he's also created a lot of classics and a lot of fragrances that were really popular decades ago. When you think of a 1977 release, I mean, ultimately it's a fragrance that is not as popular nowadays. You know, I think a lot of the commercial mainstream designer releases are a little bit on the sweeter side or on the sporty and citrusy side, and this one featuring notes of like pine needles, galbanum resin, artemisia, aldehydes. It really has oak moss as well. It has a lot of ingredients in there that are sort of reminiscent of an older era, but I'm here to let you know if I think this is a worthwhile or a decent cheapie to pick up, or if this is a fragrance that you can pretty much do without. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the presentation. So the box for this fragrance is quite simple, just has the name here in the front. Something kind of unique about the concentration though, this one is marketed as a country eau de cologne spray. So just keep in mind, this is going to be a concentration that's even weaker than eau de toilette. The serial number is printed actually below the UPC in black ink. It's a little hard to tell. And the ingredients as well as a description on the fragrance is written on the back of the box. And here's the bottle. It has this iconic Aramis shape. You see it's actually fashioned around a lot of their previous releases. The cap for this fragrance does not click into place, and it's not the most snug fit, so just be careful when picking it up from the cap as it is a heavy bottle. And the serial number is printed once more on the bottom of the bottle. The distribution on the atomizer is nice and wide. Let's continue with the smell. So one of the things that I want to talk about initially is I actually featured this fragrance in a video. And this was a video that I did not too long ago on my channel, I should say. And it was a video where I was talking about inexpensive fragrances that smell expensive. And the reason why I included this fragrance in that video is because the opening, at least, reminds me of another really popular niche fragrance. And it's one that came out either a year or two ago. I actually love this fragrance. And it's by Tom Ford, and it's called Redolessence. Now, Redolessence, and I'm so glad I acquired that fragrance. It is one of my favorite Tom Ford private blend fragrances out there. And so the fact that this fragrance smells like it in the opening was really shocking to me. And I'm also pretty convinced that Tom Ford took some inspiration from this fragrance because it is such a stark similarity that it's hard to overlook it. You know what I mean? And so it opens up with this really bright green pine needle sort of an opening that kind of puts you in the mindset of like a Christmas tree, winter holidays, and I just love that opening. It's kind of viscous and sappy and resinous. You have the galbanum in here, which really gives across more of like a green vibe. You also have a touch of oak moss in here as well, but I don't think the oak moss is as strong as it is in some other fragrances like the original Jaguar for Men and a lot of those other 80s powerhouse types of fragrances, even the original Polo Green, which actually came out in the late 70s, very similar to this one. But this one is really more centered around the note of pine needles. And there's also this leather note in there as well, and we know that leather is a fantasy note, so it's actually an accord. It's a combination of other ingredients that sort of come together to give off this impression of leather. I don't really get anything leathery about this one, but I do get something animalic about this one. And I think it's that animalic component to this fragrance that really makes it so hard for me to recommend this. If somebody said, you know what, Steve, you compare this so much to Redolessence, is this a clone of it? Well, obviously it's not, because this one came out decades before Redolessence. But if somebody asked me, is this a decent alternative to Redolessence? I've tried Redolessence in the stores, but should I buy this in order to save, you know, over $100 or whatever, $200, whatever it might be? I would say no. Because while it does smell so much like Redolessence in the opening, once you give it 20 minutes to dry down, there is this animalic note that starts to come out. And I know a lot of people have spoken about it as well, and I totally get it. There's this, it's really hard to describe, but it almost smells like civet. So if you've ever smelled civet, it almost has a smell that is similar to halitosis or bad breath. And there's definitely something lingering underneath all these other pleasant ingredients. And I don't know why this perfumer decided to include it. I don't know if that was a move on behalf of the house. I don't know if that's what was specified in the brief. I also don't know if maybe that was their attempt to masculinize the composition, make it a little funky. I don't know. But I just don't think this is going to be pleasant to too many people living in the 21st century. And I think that, you know, we have made strides in perfumery, and I do consider this to be a classic, and ultimately I'm very happy to have this one in my collection. But when I'm thinking about recommendations to make for people, if they say, man, I want a really good pine scent, I'm gonna say get Cape Heartache by Imaginary Authors. I'm gonna say get Redolessence by Tom Ford. And there's also one, I think it's called Dew by Maison Trudon. That one is one of the best pine fragrances that I've ever smelled in my life. This one, on the other hand, it's tough. It's tough. I can't recommend this one. But if you do like animalic fragrances, you're a fan of Castoreum, you're a fan of civet, you're a fan of musk, check this out. You might actually end up really enjoying this one. I just feel like, and it's not necessarily a contrast, I feel like that animalic thing works well with those green aldehydic mossy ingredients, because it puts you in the mindset of a fragrance that came out during that time period and that era. But for something to work on somebody, you know, who's in their 20s or early 30s like I am, I just think this would be kind of a difficult fragrance to recommend for that. But honestly, it's interesting. It's an interesting fragrance. I'm not going to take that away from it. I'll definitely give it that. It is an interesting fragrance. It's just one that, on account of that animalic component, I would have a hard time recommending to people nowadays. Let's go ahead and finish things off with my overall assessment. Now, first up, in terms of the uniqueness and the overall smell, super unique. You know, a lot of fragrances that came out in the late 70s and 80s, they really focus on oak moss or fir, or or patchouli, all these other green ingredients. And so to finally have a fragrance that focuses on pine needles was something really, really cool. And it does remind me of Christmas tree shopping to a certain extent. But again, you know, in terms of the overall smell and it having this pleasant attribute about it, I don't think it necessarily does, just because when it does dry down, like 20 minutes into the progression of the scent, you have this civet-like animalic musky component that is kind of difficult to get along with, especially if you have an acute sense of smell. You're definitely going to pick up on it right away. In terms of the overall smell, I personally am okay with it. You know, I just feel like other people might not be super okay with it. And it's also not the type of fragrance that I would wear around my wife. Longevity on this one was about 5 hours, which is actually pretty good compared to a lot of other fragrances that I've been wearing as of late, especially fragrances that came out such a long time ago. And, you know, there's always that fear of reformulations. But the projection was okay for the first half hour to an hour. There isn't a whole lot of citrus going on in here. I mean, there is in the note breakdown, but not really citrus that I can smell. And you also have this aldehydic component, which is quite prominent in the opening, but it's nothing to the extent of like a Chanel's No. 5 or anything like that. In terms of the versatility, I think it's a great fragrance to wear in the cold weather. I think because of the price, you can wear this one casually. I think because of the depth of the composition, this is one that can be worn formally as well. I think because of how green it is, it's one that leans a little bit masculine. And I also think it's the type of fragrance that would work well on somebody who's perhaps 40 and up. So probably a more mature gentleman versus a high schooler or like an early college student or something like that. In terms of the presentation, I think it's pretty cool. I don't mind. It's part of the gentleman's collection. It's specified as so on the box. So my final verdict for this one is, man, this fragrance has a really great opening. And if they just did away with that animalic note in the dry down and they kept that bright green sort of, you know, pine resin opening, but prolonged it or made it smell a little bit more natural, I would love this fragrance and I would be talking about it a lot, especially right around the winter time. I would be recommending it, but I just feel like for reasons that I've already stated a dozen times in this review, it's gonna be a little difficult for me to recommend it. But nevertheless, I always, you know, recommend that you go out there and you try fragrances for yourself. You know, I'm not the authority on fragrances. I'm just a guy with an opinion, and I'm here sharing it with you on this platform. And so I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today on this review. If you own or have tried this fragrance, I would love to hear your feedback. What do you think of this fragrance? Go ahead and leave a comment down below. Also, if you are new to this channel, again, if you did take something of value, please do consider subscribing to this channel to support what I do. All you have to do is click that red button in the corner, and this way, whenever I upload future fragrance related content, it'll get delivered straight to your feed. You never need to worry about missing any of my future uploads. Thanks again for watching. Love you all. We'll see you next time. Bye.